deep diving As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And most people read this book and walk away thinking that it's just another positive thinking book, but it isn't. James Allen is making a much harder claim, and that is that your thoughts are not suggestions, they're causes. And if that's true, then most people aren't failing because of luck, talent, or circumstance. They're failing because they're letting their inner life run unmanaged. There is a convenient roadmap in this video where we're going to be breaking down this book into 6 core lessons, each building on top of the last. You can bounce around, but it's probably best if you stay in chronological order. But first we're going to start with the foundation, and that's why thought itself is the root cause behind character, behavior, and outcomes. Then we'll look at how character shapes circumstance and why your environment is not the enemy that you think it is. From there, we'll move into Allen's most practical idea, the mind as a garden, and what real self-control actually means. Next, we'll cover purpose and why aimlessness quietly destroys more lives than failure ever could. After that, we'll examine achievement and sacrifice, why success always exacts a cost that most people refuse to pay. And finally, we'll end where Allen ends, with serenity, not as comfort, but as proof of mastery. Because in Allen's view, calmness is not a weakness, it's a final sign that a man governs himself. Lesson 1 gets straight to the point, that thought is the cause. James Allen begins with a claim that sounds simple but quietly dismantles most explanations that people use for their lives. That man is literally what he thinks. Not as a metaphor or motivational idea, but as a statement of cause and effect. In Allen's view, thought is not passive inner commentary. It's the originating force behind action, habit, character, and eventually circumstance. Every action is the end of a process that begins internally. Thought comes first, action follows from it, and then results arrive last. When people struggle, it's usually because they try to change the outcome while leaving the cause untouched. Allen's explicit that no action appears spontaneously. Even behavior that feels impulsive or unplanned is the outward release of thoughts, patterns that have already been rehearsed internally. What appears suddenly is usually only unseen. This is why Allen describes action as the blossom of thought and joy, or suffering as its fruit. Thought is the seed. Once planted and repeated, it moves towards expression with or without conscious approval. Allen defines character as the complete sum of a person's habitual thoughts. Not intention, self-image, or declared values, but what the mind repeatedly returns to when it's unobserved or undisciplined. This is why also change feels slow and uncomfortable. A person is not merely changing behavior, they're dissolving patterns that have hardened over time. Character is not built in moments. It's not undone in moments either. Allen insists that the law governing thought is as strict and reliable as any physical law. Right thoughts produce harmonious results, and the wrong thoughts produce suffering. There's no exceptions and no favoritism. This doesn't mean that every circumstance reflects the totality of a person's character, but it does mean that circumstances always reflect some dominant mental pattern that is currently active. Pain is not random, and success is not accidental. Most people want thought to be harmless. They want to believe that thoughts don't matter unless acted upon, that circumstances are mostly external, and that suffering is evidence of bad luck. Allen removes that comfort. If thought is casual, then fear is creative, self-pity is productive, and neglect is still a decision. There's no neutral mental ground. If thought is the cause, then discipline must be internally. Self-improvement without self-governance is impossible. And waiting for motivation is simply waiting for effect without supplying cause. Before a man can change his life, he must first change what he repeatedly allows his mind to rehearse. This is the foundation of this book and every lesson that follows the rest of it. The second lesson is on character and circumstance. After establishing thought as the cause, James Allen moves to the most uncomfortable implication. Circumstances are not independent forces acting on a person. They're expressions of character. Allen argues that a person's environment, position, and recurring conditions grow out of their inner state. This doesn't mean that circumstances define who a person is, but it does mean that they're connected to the thoughts that have been allowed to dominate over time. Circumstances don't create the man, they reveal them. Allen is careful here. He doesn't claim that a person's entire character can be judged from a single moment in their life. Instead, he argues that each circumstance is linked to some active element within the mind that, for the time being, is necessary for growth or correction. A person may feel out of place in their surroundings, yet still be there by law rather than by accident. In Allen's framework, there's no element of chance in the arrangement of life. Each condition exists because it corresponds to a mental pattern that hasn't been resolved. Most people attempt to improve their lives by resisting their conditions while preserving the thoughts that produce them. Allen describes this as revolting against the effect while nourishing the cause. When someone fights circumstances without correcting their inner habits, progress is going to stall. Effort feels exhausting and results remain unstable. The same patterns repeat under different names. Improvement begins only when a person is willing to examine the mental roots beneath their external frustrations. And Allen's argument is often misread as blame, but that's not his intent. He's not suggesting that suffering is proof of moral failure or that hardship reflects total corruption of character. Rather, he's pointing to responsibility as a form of power. If circumstances grow out of thought, then they can also be changed by correcting thought. Responsibility then becomes a doorway to freedom rather than a sentence of guilt. Allen notes that when a person earnestly works to remedy defects in character, external change often follows more quickly than expected. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, and conditions reorganize themselves in response to the altered state of mind. This isn't coincidence. It's the visible movement of cause and effect. A person's not trapped by circumstance, they're anchored by unexamined patterns. If circumstances reveal character, then they're not obstacles to be avoided, but feedback to be understood. They show where discipline is incomplete, where thoughts remain ungoverned, and where growth is still required. To change one's life, a person must stop negotiating with outcomes and begin correcting the inner conditions that produce them. Only then do circumstances lose their power to dominate and begin to serve as instruments of progress. Lesson 3 is on self-governance. Having established that thought is casual and circumstance reflects character, James Allen turns to the practical question, how a person governs the inner life that produces these results. He answers with one of the book's central images. The mind, as Allen says, is a garden. A garden doesn't become wild because something goes wrong. It becomes wild because nothing is done. In the same way, the mind doesn't produce disorder through malice but through neglect. Whether a person consciously cultivates their thoughts or not, the mind will produce growth. If no useful seeds are planted, then useless and harmful ones will take root by default. Neglect is not neutral, it's a form of choice. Allen is clear that progress doesn't begin with adding good thoughts, but with removing harmful ones. Weeding must come from cultivation. A person cannot build strength while continuing to tolerate the thoughts that undermine it. This is why Allen places such emphasis on self-control. Self-control isn't suppression or denial. It's the deliberate decision to allow certain thoughts to remain and remove others before they harden into habit. When a person begins to observe, regulate, and redirect their thoughts, they discover something essential, that they're not victims of the mind, they're its steward. Allen describes that this as becoming the conscious master of one's mental household. In ignorance, a person is still a master, but a foolish one who's misgoverned. In understanding, they become wise, directing their inner resources towards productive ends. Self-governance requires patience. Thought is deeply rooted and its effects are not always immediate. Many abandon the process because they expect quick external change and lose discipline when it doesn't arrive. Allen reminds the reader that understanding the laws of thought isn't theoretical. It comes through application, self-analysis, and experience. Just as physical strength develops through training, mental order develops through practice. Circumstances assist this process. Rather than obstruct it, each condition exposes something that remains unregulated. When a person corrects the inner fault, the circumstance that required it often dissolves and changes form. In this way, life itself becomes a training ground for self-governance, rather than a battlefield to escape. So if the mind is a garden, then freedom depends on cultivation. No one inherits a disciplined inner life. It must be built deliberately through attention removal and reinforcement. Self-governance is the bridge between understanding and transformation. Without it, knowledge remains inert, and with it, thoughts become an instrument rather than a liability. Lesson 4 is focusing on purpose versus drift. After establishing self-governance, James Allen addresses what gives disciplined thought its direction. Control alone is not enough. Without purpose, even a regulated mind drifts. Allen describes aimlessness as a form of weakness. When thought is not gathered around a central purpose, it scatters across worries, fears, distraction, and self-pity. Life becomes reactive rather than directed, and energy is spent responding instead of creating. Most people don't fail through dramatic mistakes. They fail through drift. Without a clear aim, the mind moves wherever pressure pushes it. Small anxieties multiply, minor setbacks feel overwhelming, and effort loses coherence. Allen doesn't treat this as a moral flaw, but as a structural one. Thought without purpose has no organizing force, so even effort becomes insufficient. Purpose in Allen's framework isn't necessarily grand or spiritual. It can be worldly or modest. What matters is that it's clear and sincerely held. Once purpose is defined, it gathers thought into alignment. Decisions simplify, distractions lose power, and effort begins to move in a straight line. Purpose turns scattered thinking into concentrated force. Allen places fear and doubt directly in opposition to purpose. These aren't neutral emotions, they're dissolving agents. When fear enters, effort fragments, and when doubt is indulged, action weakens. He argues that courage isn't the absence of difficulty, but the refusal to let fear dictate thought. A person who conquers fear and doubt doesn't eliminate obstacles, but they stop obstacles from ruling the mind. Allen is realistic about effort. He expects failure, especially early. What matters is not immediate success, but persistence of purpose. Each failed attempt strengthens character when the aim remains intact. Weakness isn't erased by avoidance, but by continued application. And purpose transforms failure into training rather than proof of inadequacy. When thought is consistently aligned with purpose, it becomes a creative force. Effort gains momentum and circumstances begin to reorganize around the directed will. Allen's claim is not that purpose guarantees success, but that without it, success is structurally impossible. Drift produces exhaustion and purpose produces power. To govern thought without purpose is to maintain order without direction, and to have purpose without discipline is to dream without structure. So Allen is going to insist on both. A man must choose an aim and then refuse to let his thoughts wander away from it. This isn't rigidity, but it's concentration. And concentration is the dividing line between drifting through life and shaping it. Lesson 5 is where James Allen turns to what achievement actually requires. His position is uncompromising. Nothing of value is obtained without sacrifice, and all achievement operates under law. Achievement in Allen's framework is not luck, talent, or circumstance. It's thought completed through sustained effort. What a person attains outwardly is the visible form of what they have consistently cultivated inwardly. Allen rejects the idea that results appear randomly or unevenly distributed by chance. Every result is proportionate to effort, and effort is proportionate to the discipline of thought behind it. People often see outcomes and assume fortune. Allen insists that this is a misunderstanding. What's called luck is usually unseen preparation, repeated effort, and long periods of failure that preceded visible success. Progress always demands sacrifice. A person cannot rise without giving something up. Allen is clear that achievement requires a surrender of confused thinking, indulgence, and mental disorder. The higher the aim, the greater the sacrifice that's required. This applies equally to material success, intellectual achievement, and moral or spiritual development. Nothing lasting is built without cost. Allen warns that achievement isn't permanent by default. Many collapse after success because they relax the discipline that produced it. When watchfulness ends, disorder returns. Victories attained through right thought can only be maintained through continued self-governance. Success doesn't grant immunity from law. It increases responsibility to it. Allen is really emphasizing that the universe doesn't favor greed, dishonesty, or corruption, even when it appears to do so temporarily. Surface outcomes can mislead, but law doesn't fail. What persists is what aligns with discipline and orderly thought. What's gained through confusion or excess eventually dissolves, and law corrects imbalance over time, whether it's acknowledged or not. In Allen's view, achievement is not merely external accomplishments. It's the expression of character under pressure. What a person builds reveals what they've become. This is why sacrifice is unavoidable. To achieve is to refine character, and refinement requires removal. What's surrendered determines what can be sustained. Achievement isn't a reward granted by circumstance, but the natural results of disciplined thought carried through effort and sacrifice. There's no shortcut around law, only alignment with it. Those who understand this stop envying outcomes and begin refining causes. In doing so, they exchange hope from responsibility and gain the chance for mastery. Lesson 6 points out serenity as mastery. James Allen doesn't present serenity as comfort personality. He presents it as evidence. In his view, calmness is not something a person adopts. It's something a person earns. Serenity appears only after thought has been disciplined, character refined, and purpose sustained under pressure. It isn't the absence of challenge, but the presence of inner order. Allen describes calmness as one of the highest expressions of power. A person who governs their thoughts no longer reacts blindly to circumstances. Instead of being pulled by emotions, they respond with understanding. This calm is not passivity, it's stability. It allows a person to adapt without losing direction and to endure difficulty without internal collapse. Serenity is the outward sign of inward mastery. When thought is regulated and aligned, emotional volatility diminishes. Anxiety, resentment, and impulsive reaction lose their hold. Allen emphasizes that this state isn't achieved through suppression, but through comprehension. As a person understands the laws of thought and cause and effect, agitation naturally declines. Confusion gives way to clarity. The serene individual, Allen notes, exerts influence without force. Others see reliability and steadiness, and trust forms naturally. This influence doesn't come from persuasion or dominance, but from consistency. A calm mind stabilizes its surroundings because it no longer contributes disorder to them. Most people never reach serenity because they attempt to manage life without first governing thought. They seek peace without continuing to tolerate fear, resentment, and inner contradictions. Allen is to the point here: without self-control, there can't be calm. Without right thought, there can't be lasting peace. So serenity is rare because mastery is rare. Allen makes it clear that serenity is proven under strain. Anyone can appear calm when circumstances are favorable. The difference lies in whether composure remains when conditions resist. A person who has mastered thought doesn't become immune to difficulty, but they stop being ruled by it. The storms of life continue, but they no longer overturn the inner order. Serenity isn't the goal of discipline, it's the confirmation of it. It signals that thought has been purified, purpose stabilized, and character aligned with the law. In Allen's framework, calmness is the final measure of mastery, not wealth or status or recognition. James Allen's message is often misunderstood because it's quiet. And quiet ideas are easy to dismiss, but as a man thinketh is not offering comfort, it's offering responsibilities. James Allen's message is often misunderstood because it's quiet, and quiet ideas are easy to dismiss. But this book is not offering comfort, it's offering responsibility. Across these 6 lessons, Allen makes a single continuous argument. Thought is the character is the structure that thought builds, circumstance is the visible expression of that structure, self-governance determines whether thought serves or sabotages, purpose directs disciplined thought towards achievement, and serenity reveals whether mastery has actually been attained. Nothing here depends on luck, talent, or favorable conditions. Everything depends on what a person repeatedly allows within their own mind. This is why the book feels severe, because Allen removes every convenient place to hide. He doesn't allow a man to blame fate, society, or circumstance without first examining the thoughts that shaped his response to them. In doing so, he strips life down to law, and law, unlike motivation, does not negotiate. The value of this book is not inspiration, it tells you where power actually resides and where it never has. To read as a man thinketh seriously is to accept that your inner life is not private, it is productive. It's always working, always shaping, always moving towards expression, and the thought Allen leaves you with isn't whether this law is fair, but whether you're willing to live in alignment with it. Because if thought is the cause, then mastery is not something you wait for, it's something you practice.